Picture this. It's 2030. You're sitting in the Supreme Commander's chair of some hostile superpower. You've got the warships, the boots on the ground, and the political green light. You've just signed the order to storm the United States of America. And here's the kicker. You're not even sweating the US Navy. Let's play make-believe for a second and say the entire American military just evaporated. Poof, gone like morning mist. No floating cities called aircraft carriers. No killer drones circling overhead. No leathernecks ready to ruin your day. Just the terrain, the population, and the roads. Simple, right? You're probably thinking you'll be raising your banner over the White House in what, 3 weeks? Maybe a month if traffic's bad? My friend, buckle up. You're about to step into the most spectacular logistical catastrophe humanity has ever witnessed. Here's the thing. America isn't just another nation on the map. It's a naturally fortified nightmare, sculpted by geology itself to chew up and spit out anyone foolish enough to attack it. The second your soldiers' boots hit the shore, assuming they even make it that far, you're not fighting an army. You're going to war against the laws of physics, the brutal reality of economics, and a civilian population that makes guerrilla fighters look like a neighborhood watch dispute. Today, we're not discussing nuclear warheads or stealth bombers. We're diving into the bone-chilling geographic and economic truth of why conquering the US is pure fantasy. Strap in. This is going to get ugly. Let's kick things off with the elephant in the room, the one that usually murders your invasion plans before you've finished your first cup of coffee: the oceans. To the east, there's the Atlantic. To the west, the Pacific. And these aren't just large puddles. They're logistical death traps stretching for thousands upon thousands of miles.
Coming from Europe, you're staring down roughly 3,000 to 4,000 miles of churning open water just to touch the east coast. Launching from Asia, try nearly 6,000 to 7,000 miles to reach California's shores. Want some perspective? During the Second World War, when the Allies staged their invasion at Normandy, a hop across the English Channel that's barely 20 to 100 miles wide depending where you measure, it took years of meticulous planning, millions of tons of materiel, and the combined industrial might of 3 of the world's most powerful nations. And that was for a gap you could practically swim across on a calm day. Now multiply that headache by a factor of several hundred. Stretch your supply chain to 6,000 miles. Imagine the nightmare. Let's say you want to put boots on the ground with enough firepower to actually hold territory. Military textbooks will tell you about force ratios and numerical superiority. But let's be conservative here. Let's say you're aiming to land 500,000 troops. That's actually a pretty modest figure when you're trying to occupy a nation of 330 million souls spread across nearly 4 million square miles. But here's the thing. You're not just shipping warm bodies. You're hauling their food, their ammunition, their medical kits, and most critically, their fuel. A modern armored unit burns through hundreds of thousands of gallons of diesel every single day. To sustain an invasion fleet crossing the Pacific, you'd need so many ships packed so tightly you could nearly walk from vessel to vessel. And here's where it gets darkly comedic. America has 0 convenient staging areas nearby. In most invasions throughout history, you build up your forces in a neighboring territory. The Germans used France as a launching pad against Britain, or tried to. The Americans used Britain to strike Germany. The US staged out of Saudi Arabia to hit Iraq.
Who exactly are you planning to use as your springboard into the States? Try to stage in Hawaii? You're still looking at 2,500 miles to the mainland. That's like trying to invade Iraq from London. It doesn't help. The sheer volume of shipping you'd need to move a credible invasion force across either ocean would be visible from orbit. It would take months just to gather everything together. There's no element of surprise here. You're not sneaking up on anybody.
The moment you start loading those transport vessels, the American economic machine, which we'll get to in a bit, shifts into total war footing. By the time your lead ships reach America's exclusive economic zone, your soldiers will have been crammed aboard for weeks. They'll be puking their guts out from seasickness. Their muscles will have turned to jelly from confinement. They'll be surviving on military rations that taste like cardboard soaked in regret. And what's waiting for them when they finally arrive? Not a red carpet. They're greeted by coastlines that weren't designed for easy access. The West Coast is mostly jagged cliffs and dangerous currents, with only a handful of deep-water ports capable of offloading heavy armor. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, San Diego. That's basically it. These are choke points, bottlenecks. If the defenders sink a few cargo ships in the entrance to Long Beach Harbor or blow up the massive cranes, which they absolutely would, you're stuck trying to unload tanks onto beaches while taking heavy fire. On the eastern seaboard, you've got shallow waters, treacherous marshlands, and urbanization so dense you're fighting through a concrete labyrinth the instant you step off your landing craft. Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany, supposedly once said, or at least people attribute this to him, "God has a special providence for fools, drunkards, and the United States of America." He wasn't wrong. Geography is the first line of defense.
And for America, geography is a stone-cold killer. Hey, quick break. If you're digging this journey into strategic insanity, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. Every week we dissect the darker corners of economics and history without the sanitized corporate spin. Drop a comment too. If you had to pick a landing zone for this hypothetical invasion, where would you choose? Florida? California? Texas? Spoiler alert, Texas would be a suicide run. Let's keep rolling. Alright, so the oceans are a dead end. But you're clever. You're a strategic mastermind. You think, why go by sea? I'll just land in Canada or Mexico and drive straight in. Congratulations, you've just outsmarted yourself. Let's talk about the northern route first, Canada. You land your forces there. Fantastic. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. If geology isn't your thing, here's the short version. The Canadian Shield is millions of square miles of ancient exposed rock, swamps that go on forever, thousands upon thousands of lakes, and forests so dense and freezing they might as well be another planet. It's one of the most hostile environments on Earth for moving heavy equipment and armored columns. There are barely any roads running north to south that can support the kind of weight we're talking about. The infrastructure simply doesn't exist because almost nobody lives up there. It's too cold, the ground is too hard, life is too brutal. If you land on the west side, say Vancouver, thinking you'll push down the coast, you're immediately funneled into the Cascade mountain range. You're forced into narrow passages where a handful of defenders with explosives can bury your entire convoy under an avalanche of rock. If you land on the east side, Halifax, Montreal, doesn't matter. You've got to march through the Appalachian Range and the thick forests of New England. And remember, General Winter saved Russia from both Napoleon and Hitler. Well, North American winters are no joke either. Your supply lines will freeze solid. Your tanks will sink into mud come springtime. And you're doing all this while trying to occupy Canada, a territory that's arguably just as culturally hostile to you as the United States itself. Okay, so north is out. Let's try south. You'll land in Mexico and push north. Welcome to the Sonoran and Chihuahuan deserts. This isn't just hot sand and picturesque sunsets. This is terrain that kills people who try to cross it with nothing but a backpack and a water bottle, let alone an entire army hauling heavy machinery. It's scorching, it's merciless, and water sources, good luck finding them.
But the terrain isn't even your biggest headache here. It's the logistics of the border itself. The US-Mexico border stretches roughly 2,000 miles, but where exactly can you drive a tank across? Not many places. You've got the Rio Grande acting as a natural moat for a massive chunk of it. You've got vast stretches of unpaved wilderness, and once you do manage to cross, you're not in the American heartland. You're in the Southwest, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. We'll get to the people later, but just from a pure logistics standpoint, the distances here are mind-bending. If you cross at El Paso, you're still 1,400 miles from Chicago, 1,700 miles from Washington, D.C. You'd have to drag your supply chains across thousands of miles of exposed desert, vulnerable to the elements, with almost no local infrastructure to scavenge. There are no dense clusters of cities to loot for supplies until you hit the major metro areas, which are hundreds of miles apart. And here's another fun wrinkle: the rail system. While North American rail gauges are standardized, the rail infrastructure in Mexico, while it's improving, isn't integrated or maintained to the level you'd need to move millions of tons of military hardware rapidly northward. You'd be stuck relying on trucks, and trucks need fuel. Where are you getting the gas? The US
is the world's largest oil producer. If they execute a scorched earth policy and blow the refineries in Texas, cap the wells in the Permian Basin, you're driving into a desert with no gas stations for hundreds of miles. Historically, invasions collapse because of overextended supply lines. Napoleon in Russia, the Nazis in Russia, the Americans in Vietnam, conceptually different but still supply dependent. Invading the US through Mexico or Canada creates the longest, most vulnerable supply lines in the history of warfare. You'd need to occupy and pacify Canada or Mexico first, which would take years, giving the Americans ample time to turn the border into a militarized zone that makes the Maginot Line look like a garden fence. You're trapped on the edges. Geography creates a kill zone. You might get onto the continent, but you're not reaching the vital organs. Let's say you pull off the impossible. You've crossed the ocean. You've bypassed the frozen Canadian wilderness and the Mexican desert inferno. You've managed to establish a beachhead on either coast. You're patting yourself on the back, telling your generals the hard part is behind you. Wrong. The hard part is just beginning. Now you have to deal with the shields. If you landed on the west coast, look east. See that massive wall of jagged rock stretching from Canada all the way down to New Mexico. Those are the Rocky Mountains, 3,000 miles long, in places over 300 miles wide, peaks soaring past 14,000 feet. There are very few major passes, and the ones that do exist, like Interstate 70 cutting through Colorado, are engineering miracles that snake through steep canyons, tunnels, and bridges perched hundreds of feet above riverbeds. In a defensive war, the American military, or whatever's left of the local resistance, doesn't need to fight you head-on in the open. They just need to blow the Eisenhower Tunnel. They just need to drop the bridges in Glenwood Canyon.
Suddenly, your multi-billion-dollar invasion force is stuck in a traffic jam on the I-70, surrounded by vertical cliffs. And you know who's up on those cliffs? Locals with hunting rifles who can hit a target the size of a coin from 500 yards away. You're not fighting a conventional war anymore. You're fighting Afghanistan on steroids. The Soviets spent a decade trying to pacify the mountains of Afghanistan, a fraction of the population and weaponry we're discussing here. The Rockies are bigger, the weather is more unpredictable, and the defenders are far better armed. If you try to cross the Rockies, your supply trucks will burn, your tanks will slide off icy cliffs, you'll be bled dry in the mountain passes. Okay, you say, West Coast is a trap. I'll hit the East Coast instead. Washington, New York, Boston. Smart move. You capture the coastal cities. You take Manhattan. Good luck holding it, but let's pretend you do. Now you want to push inland to the heartland, where the food and energy production are. Welcome to the Appalachians. While they're not as tall as the Rockies, the Appalachians are a nightmare of dense foliage for armored vehicles. They run from Alabama all the way up to Maine, creating a natural barrier between the coast and the Midwest. Historically, this is where empires go to die. During the 18th century, the British Empire, the greatest military force on the planet at that time, couldn't effectively project power through these mountains. They got bogged down in the woods, ambushed by irregular fighters who knew every creek bed and ravine. The geography forces you onto predictable roads. Predictable roads mean improvised explosive devices. If you're driving a convoy through West Virginia or Kentucky, you're literally in a bowl. The roads wind through valleys. The high ground is everywhere, covered in thick forest. You can't see the enemy, but they can see you. Every bridge is a choke point. Every tunnel is a potential tomb.
And unlike the deserts of Iraq, where you can see for miles in every direction, here the engagement distance is often less than 100 meters. You can't use your fancy air support effectively if you can't see through the tree canopy. You're back to close-quarters infantry combat against people who've been hunting in these woods since they were 6 years old. The geography of the United States effectively creates a citadel in the middle of the continent, the Mississippi Basin, protected by 2 colossal mountain ranges. To get to the prize, you have to storm the castle walls. And the walls are 10,000 feet high and shooting back at you. Let's stop talking about rocks and elevation for a minute. Let's talk about the scariest variable in this entire equation: the people. There's a quote, possibly apocryphal, attributed to Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto after Pearl Harbor. You cannot invade the mainland United States. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. Whether he actually said it doesn't matter. The math makes it true. Let's look at the numbers, because they're genuinely difficult to wrap your head around if you're not American. According to the Small Arms Survey, there are roughly 393 million civilian-owned firearms in the United States. That was the estimate a few years back. The number is likely well over 400 million now. There are only about 335 million people in the country. Do the math. That's more than 1 gun for every man, woman, child, and newborn baby. But we know infants aren't packing heat, usually. The firearms are concentrated. About 40 to 50% of households admit to owning a gun. But it's not just handguns and shotguns. We're talking about AR-15s, high-powered precision hunting rifles, and millions upon millions of rounds of ammunition stockpiled in basements and garages.
In the state of Wisconsin alone, during deer hunting season, roughly 600,000 hunters head into the woods. Let that sink in for a second. If the Wisconsin deer hunters were organized as an army, they'd be the 8th largest standing military force in the world. Bigger than France's active duty military, bigger than Germany's, bigger than Iran's. And that's just one state. And those are just the registered hunters. Now, you might be thinking, but these are civilians. They're not trained soldiers. My invasion force has tanks. Sure, but let's look at modern warfare. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. How well did heavy armor perform against a decentralized, motivated insurgency armed with small arms and homemade explosives? Not well. And those insurgents were often working with rusty AK-47s and limited ammunition. An American insurgency would be the most well-funded, well-equipped guerrilla force in human history. You're not just fighting rebels, you're fighting combat veterans. The US has been at war for most of the past 2 decades. There are roughly 18 million veterans living in the United States. Many of them have combat experience. They know how to construct improvised explosive devices. They know how to set up ambushes. They understand logistics, communications, and small unit tactics. Imagine you're occupying a small town in Missouri. You've got your checkpoint set up. You think you're secure. Suddenly, your supply truck hits a pressure plate buried in the road. A consumer drone bought off Amazon for $50, rigged with a pipe bomb, drops a payload on your commander's vehicle. Snipers engage you from 3 different directions using thermal optics they bought at the local sporting goods store. You try to return fire, but they vanish. They melt back into the suburbs, into the cornfields, into the dense woods. This isn't a war where you capture the capital and the country surrenders. The US is a federation of states.
If you take Washington, D.C., Texas doesn't care. Texas laughs at you. In fact, seizing D.C. might just make the rest of the country fight harder. There's no head of the snake to cut off. The resistance would be hyper-local. Every county, every town, every neighborhood becomes its own fortress. You'd need a ratio of roughly 20 soldiers for every 1,000 civilians to effectively police a hostile population. For a country of 330 million people, you'd need an occupation force of 6.6 million soldiers. The entire active-duty Chinese military is about 2 million. The entire active-duty Russian military before 2022 was around 1 million. You literally don't have enough humans to occupy the United States. You can't post guards on every street corner. And the moment you turn your back, that blade of grass is going to take a shot. Quick question for the Americans watching this. If an invasion force landed in your state tomorrow, what's the local terrain feature that would absolutely wreck their day? The swamps? The snow? The traffic on the 405? Let me know in the comments below. Okay, so the people are shooting at you, the mountains are blocking you, and the oceans are isolating you. But surely, if you capture the infrastructure, you can turn it against them, right? Here's the irony. US infrastructure is designed for commerce, not conquest. The United States is enormous. We've talked about distance, but let's talk about it in terms of time. Driving from New York to Los Angeles takes roughly 41 hours of non-stop driving. That's assuming no traffic, no destroyed bridges, and no ambushes along the way. In a war zone, that trip could take months. The US relies heavily on its interstate highway system. It's an engineering marvel, but it has a fatal flaw for an invader: bridges. There are over 600,000 bridges in the United States. If the defenders decide to execute a scorched earth policy, which they absolutely would, they don't need to destroy every road. They just need to drop the key bridges over major rivers: the Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio. The Mississippi River Basin is the jugular vein of the continent. It splits the country in half. If you blow the bridges, east and west are severed. For the US, this is manageable. Painful, but manageable, because they have the barges and boats to move supplies on the river itself. For you, the invader, you're stuck on the riverbank. You have to construct pontoon bridges across a river that's a mile wide in some places, with strong currents, all while being shot at. And then there's the rail network. The US has the best freight rail system on the planet, but it's privately owned and incredibly complex. If the operators sabotage the switching stations or derail locomotives in key tunnels, the entire network grinds to a halt. You can't just bring your own trains. The scale is too massive. You're forced to rely on trucks. And as we've already established, trucks need fuel. The US has a strategic petroleum reserve. They have refineries,
But in an invasion scenario, those refineries will be ablaze. The pipelines will be shut down. You'll be sitting in the middle of Kansas, 1,000 miles from the ocean, with an empty fuel tank, a demolished bridge ahead of you, and an angry farmer with a shotgun behind you. This is the logistical black hole. The deeper you push in, the weaker you become. The deeper you push in, the stronger the resistance gets, because they're fighting on their home ground, close to their own stockpiles and resources. You're stretching a rubber band until it snaps, and when it does, it snaps right in your face. Let's step away from the battlefield for a moment. Let's assume you're some kind of wizard. You've bypassed the Navy, scaled the mountains, dodged the armed civilians, and somehow kept your tanks fueled.
You're actually winning the ground war. Congratulations! You've just triggered the economic apocalypse. And the victim isn't just the United States. It's you. This is the economic suicide pill. The United States isn't just a participant in the global economy. In many ways, it is the operating system of the global economy. First, let's talk about the US dollar. It's the world's primary reserve currency. Roughly 60% of all foreign exchange reserves held by central banks worldwide are denominated in US dollars. Most global trade, oil, gold, commodities, is priced in dollars. If you destabilize the US government to the point of collapse, the dollar becomes worthless. Good, you might say. I hate the dollar. Think again. If the dollar crashes to zero, trillions of dollars of wealth sitting in your country's banks evaporate overnight. Your own currency, which is likely pegged to or backed by assets valued in dollars, goes into freefall. Global trade stops dead because nobody knows what anything is worth anymore. You're not just invading a country, you're detonating the bank where you keep your own life savings. Second, let's talk about technology and intellectual property. Where are your servers? Where is your cloud data stored? AWS from Amazon, Azure from Microsoft, Google Cloud. The physical infrastructure for much of the internet is heavily concentrated in the United States. If you start bombing data centers in Virginia, where a massive chunk of the world's internet traffic flows, you don't just cut off streaming services for Americans. You crash your own banking software. You crash your own military communications networks. You blind your own satellites. And then there's the brain drain. In the event of an invasion, the US wouldn't just leave their technology lying around for you to steal. They'd execute Operation Paperclip in reverse.
The smartest engineers, the nuclear scientists, the AI researchers, they're getting on planes or submarines and fleeing to allied nations. They're taking the encryption keys, the blueprints, and the source code with them. You conquer Silicon Valley, and what do you find? Empty buildings and bricked servers. The value isn't in the land, it's in the people and the systems. And those systems have poison pills built in. By invading the US, you're essentially shooting the pilot of the plane you're also riding in. The crash won't just kill the Americans, it'll send your own nation back to the Stone Age. Finally, let's talk about the most boring yet most effective defense mechanism of all: federalism and bureaucracy. You think invading is hard? Try governing. The United States is not a monolith. It's 50 separate countries wearing a trench coat pretending to be one nation. In many centralized countries, if you capture the capital and eliminate the dictator, the war is over. The police take orders from the new boss. The army stands down. In the US, the president has surprisingly limited power over day-to-day life in the states. The governors control the National Guard. The county sheriffs control local law enforcement. There are over 3,000 counties in the United States. Each one has its own sheriff, its own police force, its own local laws, and its own stubborn pride. If you capture Washington, D.C., the governor of Texas doesn't surrender. He probably declares himself President of the Republic of Texas and mobilizes the Texas State Guard. The Governor of California does the same. You don't have to defeat one government, you have to defeat 51 governments. The federal government plus 50 states, not to mention thousands of local jurisdictions. And let's not forget the sheer stubbornness of the American psyche. We're talking about a culture founded on the idea of telling the government to go to hell.
Americans argue with their own government over parking tickets. They protest their own laws. How do you think they'll react to a foreign occupier telling them what to do? You'll face a campaign of malicious compliance, sabotage, strikes, and civil disobedience on a scale never before witnessed. The electrical grid will mysteriously fail every time you try to broadcast propaganda. Water supplies will be contaminated. Roads will be blocked by accidents. You'll spend more money trying to police the population than you could ever hope to extract in resources. It's a negative-sum game. The longer you stay, the poorer you get. So let's recap your invasion strategy. 1. The oceans. You have to cross thousands of miles of water, vulnerable to attack the entire way, just to reach the fight. 2. The neighbors. You have to drag your supply lines through either the frozen hell of Canada or the scorching deserts of Mexico. 3. The geography. You have to push tanks through the Rockies and the Appalachians, which are essentially natural kill zones. 4. The people. You have to occupy a nation where grandmothers own shotguns and combat veterans are hiding in every suburb. 5. The logistics. You have to maintain supply lines across a continent designed to be severed, with bridges that will be demolished before you ever see them. 6. The economy. If you actually win, you crash the global economy and obliterate your own wealth in the process. Invading the United States isn't a military operation. It's a suicide note. It's a logistical impossibility wrapped in a geographical nightmare, deep-fried in economic ruin. The United States doesn't need a massive standing army to remain unconquered. The land itself does the heavy lifting. The Atlantic and Pacific are the walls. The Rockies and Appalachians are the towers. And the people? They're the garrison that never sleeps. So to any aspiring superpowers watching this video, don't do it. Not because you're nice, not because of international law, but because you will lose. And you'll lose spectacularly. That's the reality of American geography. It's the ultimate cheat code in the game of civilization. If you enjoyed this deep dive into hypothetical chaos, do me a favor, click that like button. It helps the algorithm way more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want more videos where we tear apart the terrifying realities of geopolitics, economics, and history without the corporate polish. I want to know your thoughts. Which state would be the absolute hardest to conquer? Is it Florida with its alligators and humidity? Alaska with its brutal cold? Or maybe New York with its sheer attitude? Drop your answer in the comments below. I'll be reading the best ones. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.